Hello everyone, thanks so much for joining. In this video I would like to explain the impact of a company's capital structure on weighted average cost of capital. In my classes I always see a lot of confusion when introducing the capital structure and how it affects the discount rate used to calculate your present value of future or free cash flows to your capital providers. So what I'm going to do, show you a quick example and hopefully make it clear how your weighted average cost of capital is affected. So as you know, the general formula for return weighted average cost of capital, cost of equity times weight of equity plus cost of debt 1 minus taxes, because debt is tax deductible, times the proportion of debt. Again, I explained this in one of the other videos. I can use R for return or cost interchangeably. I call it cost of equity because the only difference is whether I look from a company perspective or from an investor perspective. From an investor perspective, it's my return. If I'm a shareholder, this is my return. If I'm a debt holder, this is my return. From a company perspective, in order to get this money, you need to pay your capital provider. So from a company perspective, it is your cost to borrow that money from your shareholders or debt holders. Weight equity is basically the amount of equity, so it is basically equity portion over your entire right side of the balance sheet. Here it's debt E plus D, and usually we talk, it's not right to say entire right side, it's mainly the equity and long-term debt portion that affects the capital structure. We would not necessarily always include the current portion of debt. Yeah, so here equity, equity debt, and equity debt. If we assume the company has zero debt, then we would not have this. Yeah, so let's assume the following. Let's assume, and that's the key question I always ask. As we know, because of the ranking and about the risk and repayment if the company goes bankrupt, we know that our cost of equity is always a bit higher. So let's assume our cost of equity is 15% and cost of debt is 5%, which makes sense, because if the company has trouble, the debt holders get paid first, so they don't need to request such a high return because their position is less risky than the equity holder's position. So if we assume we have 100% equity, then our weighted average cost of capital would be 15%, would basically our cost of equity. If we introduce more and more debt, something will happen. So if we introduce 50% debt, 50% equity, let's leave the tax portion out for the time being. You could argue and say, okay, it makes sense. I have a portion 50% here, 50% equity portion and 50% debt portion. Makes sense. So my weighted average cost of capital would be 10%, right? Because I have 50% of 15 and 50% of 5. So I would take the average. This is what most students actually answer. And when I ask them if a company takes on more debt, what would happen to your weighted average cost of capital? The main answer is your weighted average cost of capital would decrease, because you would shift your proportion to the debt side, and because your debt has a lower cost, your WACC would shift towards this lower figure, in this example 5%. This is not correct, because what would happen is, we know RE equals risk-free plus beta times risk market minus risk-free. This is external. That's an external number, has nothing to do with the capital structure. This is an external figure, and this is an external figure. They have nothing to do with whether we change the capital structure, external. So it wouldn't change, wouldn't affect RE. But what happens if you introduce more debt, if you take on more debt? Yes, you would change your proportion. You would go to 50, 60, 70 and so on, and you would decrease this portion. So you would shift to the right towards your lower cost of debt, 5%. However, at the same time, your cost of equity would not stay at 15%. It would go up. And the reason why your cost of equity would increase is because your beta would increase. Yeah, RF stays the same, market risk stays the same, market and risk-free rate, both together, market risk premium, they remain, but your beta would increase because you increase financial leverage. Yeah, so the main message here, and I don't want to overcomplicate, but the main message here, increases in the amount of debt, if you take on more debt issued by a firm, will increase the systematic risk. And as you know from another video, systematic risk is measured in beta. Increase the systematic risk faced by equity holders because more business risk is concentrated on them. Yeah. So increases in systematic risk will affect your cost of equity. Yeah. There are many graphs. I do another video where I show you a few graphs under different assumptions. But in general, when we introduce more debt, your WACC will not decrease. It is actually, the main message is your WACC would, throughout the entire range, would actually stay the same. The only effect, the only positive effect you would have is this tax deduction. So what would happen if you introduce taxes? Because debt is tax deductible, the more debt you take, the more taxes you save. So you have a small positive cash flow effect here, and your WACC would slightly reduced just because of this tax effect, but not because of the debt, because of you have a lower cost of debt. However, at a certain point, there are distress costs. If you take on so much debt, distress costs, so it's always a balance between tax savings and additional distress costs. So that's why there is not one figure right. That's why every company has teams, treasury teams, that work on capital structure to think about, okay, for my company, in my industry, what is the best capital structure? How much debt can we take on to save taxes? But how much debt are we actually capable to pay down? And what is the underlying risk? Yeah, but main message is, if you take more debt, your weighted average cost of capital will not decrease because you have the beta effect here. Your beta increases, which would increase your cost of equity more or less at the same amount. Good. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you found this useful. Talk to you later. Bye.